But here we go again with a god-awful situation perpetrated by police, not necessarily in this area, but in the southeast region of this country. What are your thoughts about Tyre Nichols?
My thoughts and prayers first and foremost go out to his family. I would have hoped we would not be here again, but we are. And this is what happens when you fail to make good on campaign promises to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And so at the NAACP, we renewed our call for serious reform of the policing system, as well as the passage of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, because Tyre should not have had to suffer at the hands of police that horrific beating by 5 officers, and then a lack of any type of aid being rendered by the other officers and the EMTs. So my heart goes out to his family, but it's past time for actual action on this, because if we don't do anything, there will be other Tyre Nichols and Rayshard Brooks and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all the other names that we've been calling for years.
When you talk about the empathetic attitude towards this Black young man that the police had and the EMTs and the fire personnel that were there, this and then the casual banter amongst the officers right after the beating occurred, and they knew that they were on body cams and sky cam, and it seemed as though it was just another day at the office. What do you attribute to this real cavalier attitude towards what just occurred?
Lack of any serious consequences for any of their actions. I think these police officers and other police officers around the country have grown emboldened by the lack of any type of real substantial accountability. Yes, we have the cases, the major cases where people are held accountable and they go to prison for very long prison sentences. But there needs to be a message from the very top that we don't stand for this type of behavior and that we will take action. And that means real police accountability. Even now, I'm hearing politicians talking about we need more training. Training would not bring Mr. Nichols back, and training was not the issue. The issue was they felt like they would not be held responsible. And these police officers, with the level of viciousness, the level of vitriol, the names and the things that they were doing, they've clearly done this before. And now to find out that the police chief, who is now over the Memphis Police Department, came from Atlanta during the era of Red Dog, I'm not surprised at what I saw. You know, I grew up in Atlanta, born and raised here where Red Dog was flourishing. This is the type of behavior that we heard about, that we saw, and that we made sure was disbanded in Atlanta, especially after what happened to Kathryn Johnston. So they can't say they didn't know. All they had to do was call Atlanta. We would have told them that there was a problem.
So I want you to reiterate that, because I don't want that to go over the heads of our viewers. But the fact is that the police chief of Memphis, of that Scorpion unit, has connections to the Red Dog Jump Out boys here in Atlanta back in the day, the Red Dog. Again, talk to us about that and how that connection ties into what's currently going on now.
Anybody that's been in Atlanta any amount of time knows about the elite crime suppression unit known as the Red Dogs, who would drive around in unmarked cars and jump out on people and deliver beatings and do all kinds of other things that were afoul of the law, and ultimately ending in the botched drug raid that led to the death of Kathryn Johnston over in the Vine City area. So when people say, oh my God, we didn't see this coming, you know, if we had known that this particular police chief was in Memphis with the Scorpion unit, we would have been able to tell people, hey, you know, Red Dog didn't work in Atlanta. Scorpion unit won't work in Memphis. We're glad to see it's been disbanded in Memphis, but it should have never been in Memphis. And now that makes us take a broader look at all these suppression units around the country. You know, Atlanta still has now the newest iteration of Red Dog, which is the Titan unit. And Clayton County is trying to bring back Cobra. We all know what happened in Clayton County. So we need to have a real conversation that, you know, policing should not be over-militarized and oversaturated in certain communities, and crime suppression units should not turn into occupation and militarized tactics by law enforcement on citizens. So yes, if Memphis had called Atlanta, Memphis would have known before Tyre was brutally beaten to death that the Scorpion unit was not a good idea.
I want to talk about the fact that these officers, for whatever the reason, were already at 100 prior to the stop even happening. They get to him, they pull him out the car, beat him down without issuing any warning. I don't even know what the probable cause was for them to even stop him in the beginning. Now, there's a lot of rumors circulating out there, and I don't want to, add to that. But what would make an officer start at 100 before they even interact with the subject?
Yeah, and I think that's a valid question. There are a lot of rumors floating around. We don't want to validate any of the rumors. I haven't spoken directly to Ben about the rumors, so we're not going to get into those. But it did appear that the officer was on 100 when he first approached. And it didn't appear, and the police chief has said this, it didn't appear any infractions of the law were articulable at the time he was stopped, let alone being stopped by an unmarked car and boxed in that way is concerning. And then to open the door, not ask for license and registration, not tell the person why you're stopping them, yank them out the car, and then start threatening to tase them and tasing them and pepper spraying them and doing all those things. That is not police training, and that's not what should happen. And so I don't know why the officer was on 100. That's a good question for the district attorney and for all of the people that are going to thoroughly investigate this, because officers should, one, identify themselves, two, make sure that they get the identification of the person they're stopping, three, tell the person why you're stopping them, and then four, go into the next steps on gathering information and making sure people's rights are protected. Because as a citizen, you have basic rights. And it just seemed like Tyre's rights didn't matter. His life didn't matter to these officers. And that's why it's important that we hold these officers accountable for their actions.
So I want to go back to the officers' actions in a minute, but I really want to talk about, and I know because we've been out here fighting this for years as it relates to police brutality. Yes. And a lot of the police brutality that has occurred happened with people that don't look like us. So we've been the victims, people that look like us, but the people who perpetrated these crimes, these officers, didn't look like us. Now, all of a sudden, we have 5 Black officers who, in my opinion, are going to be made the poster children for all police brutality, because what I'm hearing is all kinds of adjectives describing how horrendous this was and how awful these guys are. And we didn't hear that when Jamarian Robinson got killed. We didn't hear that when Rayshard Brooks got killed. We didn't hear that when George Floyd and Breonna Taylor got killed. So, of course, I'm happy that there is attention being paid to these rogue officers. But at the same time, as awful as what happened was, I don't think that we need to be making these Black men the poster children for police brutality.
Absolutely. And I think that it goes to a deeper, more systemic issue. Many people are saying, well, this isn't a race issue because all the police officers were Black. Well, first off, all the police officers weren't Black. The one gentleman who appeared to be the one who started all of this was being protected. And now he's been suspended and their actions are probably going to be taken on him. But this is a systemic issue within policing. The issue is the dehumanization of the suspect, regardless of race, because, I've seen a whole lot of tapes of white people being beaten like this before, as well as Black people. But it seems as though when the Black people get this type of beating, there's a presumption of they must have done something. This was justified. This was an isolated incident. And now that it's Black officers that mainly did this, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. Horrendous. We're glad that the police department took these steps. No. In every case, they should take these type of steps when police officers violate the public trust. And so I agree with you. When you have a situation like this, and let me be clear, this is not the worst tape I've ever seen. I've seen tapes in court where individuals were actually charged with obstructing the police, felony obstruction, and they were getting beat like this. And the question I was asking was, how in the world did we get to court and my client is the one getting beat? and he's charged. So let's put that aside. Let's also talk about another tape, the Rodney King tape. This tape was not worse than the Rodney King tape.
I agree.
What's worse about it is that, unfortunately, Mr. Nichols succumbed to his injuries. But we have seen brutality, for 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years. It just happens that in this particular case, that poll camera caught it all.
That's right.
And there's no justification. So, from the NAACP perspective, we're calling out all of this. Regardless of the color of the officers, regardless of there is an institutional problem in American policing with the lack of accountability. And we're not going to make these police officers the poster child. We are going to deal with the systemic issues. That's what we call them for the passage of the George Floyd Justice Policing Act, because Tyre Nichols should be alive. And there should have been federalized standards on this type of behavior and preventing it. Number two, we're calling on all body cams to be placed on all sworn public servants in Georgia. Post-certified sworn officers have to have body cams, period. Full stop. We're calling on a searchable database that's public, that delineates every single officer who has been found to have committed an act of police brutality to be up and public, so that officers can't go from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction and it's swept under the rug. Because honestly, if Memphis had known about the Atlanta officer who's now the chief,
right,
maybe they would have thought twice about hiring the chief.
Yep.
Third, we need to prevent law enforcement officers from being able to testify in the grand jury in their own police-involved case. That's the biggest barrier in Georgia, is that they can sit in the grand jury and give testimony where no other potential defendant has even access to the grand jury, let alone sitting in the grand jury and giving testimony. That should be banned tomorrow.
That's a built-in defense for them. Like you have an upper hand, way above any other defendant.
Absolutely. And finally, we have to have an independent prosecutor assigned in all police-involved death cases. So we have a second set of eyes that doesn't work with this department, that doesn't get all their cases from this department, but has a second set of eyes that can look into the death cases and give an independent evaluation and present it to a grand jury. And I'm not talking about a civil grand jury, because we got some DAs in this state that want to use the out. I'm presented to a civil grand jury where they can make a recommendation of whether or not we should present charges. No, present the charges through an independent prosecutor, and let's let the citizens make a determination on what type of behavior is acceptable in our community.
So what's next? Like, tomorrow is this young man's funeral. We probably will go down there to cover that. And here's my issue with, and I'm going to say us, people of color. There seems to be a playbook, right? You've seen it, I've seen it. Somebody dies, we do a vigil, we march, there's a funeral, and then we wait for the next thing to happen. How do we, as citizens, as media people, you as the president of the NAACP, what can we do today, as you were saying, to curb some of this stuff, man? Because it's happening too often. Yeah.
First and foremost, we have to grieve for the families. So I think it's a good idea to be present with the families through all of this. I've been to too many funerals, but you have to go.
Yeah.
Then secondly, after we pay due respect to the person who lost his life and supported his family, we got to hold these politicians accountable. And, the marching is to raise awareness. Awareness is there. Now we got to go to the one place that it makes a difference. That's down to the Gold Dome, and demand that they listen to the voices of these families and the people. Again, we had the largest protest in the history of this country. The history.
Yep.
And we didn't get any legislation.
That's right.
That's because we let up. Yep. We cannot let up. We have to put pressure on Congress. We have to put pressure on these state houses. We have to put pressure on the city councils, because what they did was they changed the narrative. They changed the narrative from police accountability to crime is spiking and we need to make sure that we fund the police. Now, let me be clear. I'm not anti-law enforcement. I'm pro-justice. And pro-justice means that there has to be justice. So we got to show up in the places where they make the law, and we got to show up in the places where they enforce the law. And let me be clear, they don't enforce the law on the side of the road. The law is enforced in courtrooms. And so we got to show up at the hearings. We got to demand indictments. We got to demand that people don't get bonds. We got to demand that there's a trial. We got to sit on the juries as trial jurors, and we got to send a message from the people. We're done with this. When the NAACP, we said it. We're done dying, done. And so yesterday, the families of all of the people affected in Georgia were down at the Gold Dome lobbying. We've made our position clear to legislators, to the lieutenant governor, to the mayor, and we want to make it clear to the governor if he'll sit down and have this conversation. But we're going to make it clear to our legislative Black caucus. We're going to make it clear to people on the other side of the aisle, we're done. Pass the laws to take away sovereign immunity. Pass the laws to mandate that every Georgia officer wears a body cam so we can actually see what happened. Pass a law that makes it a requirement of an independent prosecutor, because some of these prosecutors just don't have the courage to do what's necessary, like what they did up in Minnesota. Keith Ellison was an independent prosecutor. He was not the prosecutor in Hennepin County. We need an independent prosecutor. And we need to remove these barriers like sovereign immunity and like qualified immunity that prevent families from getting justice. These are the low-hanging things that we can do. And so we as an African-American community, after we've been done grieving, it's time to put our shoes on. It's time for us to call our elected officials. You know, the one we just elected last month. We need to have a conversation with him and the other senator and every elected official that we send to Congress, including the one that runs around here with the QAnon stuff. We need to have a conversation with her and tell them, line item number 1, police accountability. You can't have accountability if folks aren't being held accountable.
Right.
It's not about listen, you cannot train your way out of this.
Right. It's systemic.
Yes. So those are the things that I would suggest. Those are things that we've been doing. Those are the things that the NAACP is behind, because we know how to deal with this. What we need is the public to understand that this is not just a media cycle. We've been talking to families who've been suffering for 15, 20 years. Some of them 30 days. It runs the spectrum, and they're all saying the same thing. Their heart goes out to Tyre Nichols' family.
Right.
So let's make sure there's no more Tyre Nichols by passing laws that hold people accountable for doing this.
Speaking of the Gold Dome, what is your thought about this preemptive strike, that I call it, to bring in the National Guards for something that wasn't even our issue? And when I say our issue, this thing occurred in Memphis. Why was the National Guards here in Atlanta, Georgia?
Because the governor thought it was a good idea to respond to police brutality with militarization. And as you can see, the National Guard has been here for, 4 days now? Nothing has happened because Atlanta knows how to protest. We will not be scared out of protest. It's our First Amendment right. And I have to remind people of that. You know, everybody want to talk about Second Amendment. The First Amendment is the First Amendment for a reason. We have an absolute right to peacefully bring our grievances before our elected officials, our government, and we're going to continue to do that. So if you want to waste money on the National Guard, having them stationed in Atlanta because your state patrol didn't have body cams, I don't know if that's going to be a good issue to run on in whatever your next election is, because we know there's another election coming.
Absolutely.
And so what I would say is this shows the people directly where the thought process is of certain elected officials. In the birthplace of civil rights, in a place where we've had the biggest protest in the history of this state, you decide to bring in the National Guard. The people that did what they did on P Street have been arrested. They were out of towners. So why are you weaponizing our own National Guard against the people? So what I would just say is respectfully, Governor, send the National Guard home and address these families, because these families live here and they vote and they're watching. And, you know, the proper response of somebody who is truly law and order is to enforce the law and bring justice to everybody. Because again, law enforcement are not the law. The law happens in courtrooms. Justice happens in courtrooms. Let's move back to getting to courtrooms to determine what actually happened in these cases. And that's why the NAACP is calling for a meeting with the governor. We'll meet whenever you want to. We'll bring the families and let you listen to them and listen to the pain, listen to the lack of accountability, listen to the lack of transparency, listen to the lack of body cams on Georgia State patrolmen. So instead of weaponizing, come to the table and have a discussion on how change happens.
My last question, speaking of change, if what is happening to Black African-American young men specifically were happening to young white men, what would you think would be the results of the law enforcement and all the things that we're looking to find as it relates to justice? What do you think would occur if it were happening to them opposed to us?
Swift change in the system. There will be laws passed. There will be police officers held accountable. There would be full funding of the root causes that are, you know, driving this. But because they believe that we don't know how to stand up and push back in a nonviolent manner, as our ancestors did, they're allowing this to happen. And let's be clear, there's some elected Black officials that are allowing this to happen too. Silence is deafening. The silence is deafening. They all saw Tyre Nichols beaten to death. They all saw George Floyd choked to death for 9 minutes and 49 seconds. And all they could give us was thoughts and prayers, a few signs posted on basketball courts and football fields, and a bunch of fluff rhetoric. We're tired of the fluff rhetoric because 2020 never stopped. Freedom Summer 2020 never stopped. What we did was we marched in the streets, and then we marched to the polls.
That's right.
And so Freedom Summer 2023 can pop off at any given time, and it's feeling like Freedom Summer 2023 is coming. And of course, we're going to be peaceful and nonviolent, but you got to understand, 75% of the people feel the way we feel, and it's time for change. And so my hope is that, that at the State of the Union, President of the United States will outline a plan, a pathway forward for the Senate to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, because we have enough votes in the Senate. If you suspend the filibuster for the purpose of civil rights legislation, you got the will right now. And so we want to see if our elected officials have the real temerity and gumption to do what's right. Because again, thoughts and prayers get you nowhere. It gets you another dead person and another family that's grieving. And so that's what we're calling on. And we're telling people, write your elected official, email your elected official, call your elected official, go down to their office. I saw the governor release his plan for 2023's legislative agenda. That's not our agenda. Our agenda is what you saw the whole world hold their breath about. From Wednesday to Friday, everybody had their breath held. Yeah. And then Friday evening, we watched the tape. And many of us said the same thing. We have seen this before.
Yep.
So what are y'all going to do? I know what I'm going to do. Okay. I met with the mayor yesterday, met with the lieutenant governor a few days before that, demanding a meeting with the governor. We've already laid out a comprehensive plan that could be submitted as legislation this morning, tomorrow morning, or whatever of the last 40 days that we have in session. But if you don't do it, we're taking down names. Election day in Georgia, y'all know how we turn out votes. We speak for 3.3 million Black people in the state, 2.2 million that are registered to vote. We can put 1.8 million on the board at any given time, and that's enough to win any election in Georgia. So I would strongly urge our elected officials to listen to the people, because the people are watching you.
Attorney Griggs, man, like always, you are always on the cutting edge of these issues, fighting every day, not just as an attorney, but just a civil rights leader. Glad that you're there, making a lot of changes there, and we appreciate that, man. The fight continues, man, and you know, I would love to see the day when we're having conversations about the positive things that occur in our community. But unfortunately, we have these conversations too often, man.
Yeah, we do. And what I want to remind your viewers is this. The journey to justice is long. The arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. That's what Dr. King said. Well, I would remix that a little bit. The arc of the moral universe is bent toward justice. We have to get off the sidelines and start doing bending. In the spirit of W.E.B. Du Bois, in the spirit of Fannie Lou Hamer, in the spirit of Walter White, in the spirit of Thurgood Marshall, in the spirit of all these legends, and for Atlanta, in the spirit of John Lewis, in the spirit of C.T. Vivian, in the spirit of John Dale Johnson and Julian Bond, and so many others in this city. The world's looking at this city. We need to send the right message. And the right message is, we sick and tired of dying, and we sick and tired of these politicians making promises that they don't live up to. So we're going to go directly to their house, which is the People House, and we're going to hold them accountable. So again, if the George Perry Floyd Justice and Policing Act is not passed, it's 2023. There's a presidential election in 2024. Get ready.
Well, you said it, y'all. Get ready. We've been speaking with the incredible Attorney GERALD Griggs, president of the NAACP, and here in Georgia, and doing amazing things. So you heard everything this man had to say, you know, and he's speaking from his heart. You see him out there fighting all the time. And at this point, all we can say is enough is enough. We tired of getting killed. We tired of getting beat. You know, we want the same things out of life as everybody else. So just give us a chance to live. That's all we asking for, just equality, making sure that we have an equal playing field, not only here in the state of Georgia, but across the world.